Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi. Forced her way toward the shattered altar, threatening to kill anyone who tried to stop her. Even the Black Snow investigators quietly stepped aside, giving her room to grieve. Jishar hadn't been dead for very long, making the loss hurt even more. Thorkel couldn't stop blaming himself, wondering if they could have saved his brother had he uncovered the barrier just a little sooner. Thankfully, Julius Ragnar stayed beside him. After examining the scene, Julius noted that the area was overflowing with traces of demonic cult rituals. The sacrificed body of a Ragnar successor, combined with the faint, lingering aura of her relic, painted a horrifyingly obvious picture. While Ansuo struggled through the crushing grief of losing her reckless brother, her own master, the tyrant dragon, couldn't have looked less concerned. Instead of checking whether his remaining disciple was all right, he openly admired the bold move Ed Trovan had pulled. Anso silently burned that moment into her memory, knowing she'd never forget how little her master cared. By then, Kyle Ragnar and Theo had already returned from the isolated rift between space and time. The instant they stepped back into the real world, both of them sensed a familiar, unsettling stench lingering in the air. Kyle casually joked that it looked like he'd have to cut off his father's head one more time, because something in the world had clearly changed. Turning to Theo, the patriarch reminded him to stand on business, because life's greatest trials always arrived much sooner than anyone expected. There was no longer any room for doubt the Mad Dragon Emperor had truly been resurrected. From the very beginning, Trovan's real objective in this war had been to bring their former patriarch back to life. Ragnar had only suspected it before, but the horrifying remains of the ritual altar proved the resurrection had already succeeded. Realizing they could no longer afford to wait, the clan launched an even more aggressive campaign to end the war before Trovan could fully unleash the Mad Dragon Emperor's power. The strategy worked. Trovan rapidly lost territory, was driven back on every front, and eventually found itself pushed to the brink of total collapse. But despite an entire month of relentless searching and investigation, not a single clue leading to the resurrected Mad Dragon Emperor was uncovered. With no progress being made, the 9 dragons gathered to decide their next move. Julius Ragnar voiced his concern first, explaining that, although Ragnar continued winning battle after battle, everything felt a little too convenient. To him, the recent victories almost seemed like they were being guided straight into a carefully prepared trap. Right then, Thoral, the tyrant dragon, strolled into the meeting late, acting just as loud, filthy-mouthing, and confrontational as always. Fresh off the battlefield, he dismissed everyone's concerns, insisting that one old fossil coming back from the dead wasn't worth overthinking. His philosophy was simple: keep crushing the enemies standing right in front of them, and the results would speak for themselves. One of the other 9 dragons immediately called him out for being unbelievably short-sighted. She reminded everyone that the Mad Dragon Emperor's greatest weapon wasn't brute strength, but mental manipulation. Once that ancient monster truly made his move, Ragnar could collapse from the inside before they even realized what happened. She even hinted that Dante himself might already be under the enemy's influence. Naturally, Dante exploded, telling her to worry about her own weak daughter instead of sticking her nose into his business. Before the argument could spiral any further, the Black Dragon shut both of them down. Regardless of the hidden threats, Ragnar still held the momentum. If they captured the Trovan capital, the war would effectively be over. Seizing on those words, Dante immediately pushed his own agenda once again, demanding permission to launch a full assault and personally flatten the Trovan capital. 3 days before the final assault on the Trovan capital, the White Armor Dragon cavalry was busy making their final preparations, with victory seemingly within reach. Everyone was eager to end the war and finally return home. The atmosphere was surprisingly light, despite everything they'd been through. Selphard couldn't resist teasing Erin, joking that she should wear the weird dress her mother made for the upcoming victory ceremony. Erin immediately shut that idea down, because making fun of his mother's handmade dress was crossing the line. While the others laughed and enjoyed the brief moment of peace, Theo couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in the back of his mind. Something wasn't right. In his previous life, this war wasn't supposed to happen for another 5 years. By changing so many events, he had likely forestriven into making their move long before they were fully prepared. Every action he'd taken had pushed history further away from the future he once knew, and whenever things started going too smoothly, unpredictable variables always found a way to appear. Even so, there was still one person Theo believed could help him make sense of everything. As he remained lost in thought, Theo Ragnar unexpectedly dropped by to check on his little brother. The two brothers talked openly about everything that had happened, with Thoral joking that Theo was worrying about the enemy so much he almost sounded like a traitor before laughing it off himself. The joke reminded Theo that he'd never truly thanked his older brother for everything he'd done. Even though Jishar had met a tragic end, Thoral remained confident that Ragnar would continue standing at the top. To him, the clan's greatest strength wasn't just individual power, it was the bonds they shared. Growing more serious, Thoral asked Theo a simple but meaningful question. What kind of Ragnar did he want to create? Theo answered honestly. The Ragnar he envisioned wouldn't be built upon the law of the strong. It might sound idealistic, but he wanted a clan where trust replaced fear as the foundation, holding everyone together. Hearing that answer brought a genuine smile to Thorkel's face. Clearly pleased, he returned to his unit after telling Theo to use the remaining 3 days to get some proper rest before the final battle. Watching his brother leave, Theo couldn't help comparing him to the Thorkel from his previous life. In the end, he realized Thoral hadn't changed at all. Their views on the world were remarkably similar, and although they were destined to compete for the position of family head, Theo couldn't think of anyone he'd rather have fighting by his side. During the brief downtime, Hulkus excitedly invited Theo to have one more sparring match for old time's sake, but Theo had somewhere important to be. Summoning Umbra, he mounted his partner and set off alone, hoping to find answers about the uncertain future before the final battle began. Meanwhile, Thoral found himself alone, quietly reflecting on Theo's words. The more he thought about them, the prouder he became. For the first time, he felt fortunate to have a younger brother he genuinely didn't want to fight, not out of fear, but out of respect. While taking a moment to clear his thoughts, he noticed an elderly man struggling to cross a raging river nearby. The old man nearly lost his footing as the powerful current threatened to sweep him away. Without hesitation, Thoral rushed over and rescued him, seeing how dangerous the crossing was. He suggested taking a much safer route around the bridge, even if it meant a longer journey. The old man sadly explained that he couldn't afford the delay. His sick grandson was waiting on the other side, and the herbs inside his pack were desperately needed. True to his compassionate nature, Thoral immediately offered to carry the old man across on his back. Together, they slowly pushed through the rushing water while casually talking along the way. After listening to Thoral speak warmly about his siblings, the old man eventually asked him about his father. The question struck a nerve. Thoral admitted that he'd never truly felt close to Kyle Ragnar, who had always made it painfully clear that the Ragnar clan wasn't a place for family affection. Those buried feelings surfaced before he even realized it. By the time they finally reached the opposite bank, the old man warmly invited Thoral to stop by his home for dinner, as thanks for the help. Ever polite, Thoral declined the invitation, planning to return to his duties instead. But the old man wasn't finished. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly, as the elderly stranger tightened his grip around Thorkel's shoulders. In that single moment, Thoral realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He had exposed the deepest weakness in his heart to the last person he ever should have. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Trusted. The old man effortlessly read every emotion hidden inside him, and calmly spoke those feelings aloud as if they were an open book. By the time Thoral realized he had been drawn into the conversation, it was already too late. The harmless old man dropped his disguise, revealing himself as none other than the Mad Dragon Emperor, who formally extended an invitation for Thoral Ragnar to abandon the light and join his side instead. While Thoral was unknowingly getting manipulated by his own grandfather, Theo was flying across the skies near the boundary forest, bordering the Demon Sea north of Ragnar. His destination was Spectral Castle, a hidden fortress concealed behind an incredibly powerful barrier. The barrier only weakened at midnight, revealing the castle for a brief window before sealing itself away again. Theo and Umber arrived at the perfect time and slipped inside as the barrier opened. Despite the eerie name, Spectral Castle wasn't some abandoned ruin. The entire estate was surprisingly clean, elegant, and meticulously maintained. Walking through its gates, Theo couldn't help feeling a little excited. Ever since the nomination ceremony, he'd been curious about Hilda Ragnar, the former family head from 2 generations ago. She had shown both goodwill and genuine curiosity toward him back then, so he figured she probably wasn't planning to kill him. And even if she was, he'd already prepared an escape plan just in case. As Theo wandered deeper into the castle, the hall suddenly came alive with visions. He watched an image of a woman relentlessly pushing herself through brutal training, but every scene was intangible, making it obvious that illusion magic was at work. Rather than trying to deceive him, it felt like Hilda was intentionally showing him pieces of her own past. The peaceful training scenes gradually transformed into endless battlefields, stained with blood. Even though everything around him was only an illusion, the overwhelming pressure radiating from Hilda's past self made Theo's body instinctively tense. Her aura alone was enough to trigger his survival instincts. It quickly became clear that these weren't random memories. They were fragments of Hilda Ragnar's previous lives. Before he realized it, Theo found himself standing inside Hilda's throne room, where countless loyal soldiers stood in perfect formation before their ruler. But this wasn't the present. It was another memory. He watched a version of Hilda's life that ended with her dying inside her own castle, drowning in a sea of blood. Seeing someone as overwhelmingly powerful as Hilda meet such a brutal end felt completely surreal. As soon as that vision ended, the illusions looped back to her endless training once again. Watching the same cycle repeat over and over finally made Theo understand what Hilda had meant when she recognized him during the nomination ceremony. She had identified him as a regressor with a single glance, because she was one herself. Unlike Theo, however, Hilda had already exhausted every one of her regression cycles. Whenever a regressor died, they returned to a predetermined point in time, and the illusions continued showing Hilda's countless attempts to alter her fate. In one timeline, she conquered everything through overwhelming violence, beheading her enemies, and decorating the grounds around Spectral Castle with their severed heads. During those cycles, Hilda became practically invincible. Yet despite all that power, she eventually suffered her greatest defeat, not at the hands of an enemy, but from the man she loved. Unable to tolerate the monster she had become, he drove a blade straight through her heart from behind her throne. Rather than feeling regret over her own actions, Hilda only burned with rage. She hated herself for allowing such an obvious weakness to exist. As her life faded away, she swore that in her next cycle, she would crush the man she once loved beneath even greater terror. If he refused to look at her anymore, then she'd simply become someone too terrifying for anyone to ever turn away from again. After that, Theo witnessed what felt like an entire lifetime of slaughter. Every regression ended in death, but every new cycle also increased Hilda's mountain of kills. Eventually, all the bloodshed blurred together until individual memories became impossible to distinguish. No matter how many times she repeated history, though, every path still led her toward the exact same tragic ending. Watching those endless failures made Theo wonder if constant regression slowly eroded a person's sanity. If that was true, then was he destined to follow the same path as every regressor before him? Just as those unsettling thoughts began consuming him, the illusions finally disappeared. Reality itself seemed to melt away, and Theo found himself standing inside the real throne room face to face with Hilda Ragnar herself. With a faint smile, she casually asked whether he'd enjoyed her little illusion show. Remaining respectful, Theo immediately bowed and formally greeted the former family head. Although they had briefly spoken during the nomination ceremony, she was still someone he absolutely couldn't afford to lower his guard around. Hilda simply laughed and told him to relax. After all, they'd already shared secrets that few people in the world could ever understand. With nothing more than a flick of her finger, reality shifted once again. The empty throne room instantly transformed into a luxurious dining hall, complete with a lavish table prepared for the two of them. As Theo took his seat, someone unexpectedly approached to serve the meal. Standing before him was the legendary descendant dragon himself. Theo had heard the rumors before, but seeing it with his own eyes confirmed everything. The stories claiming that Grand Matriarch Hilda kept the Ascendant Dragon as her personal attendant were actually true. It was almost unbelievable that someone possessing such overwhelming strength was calmly serving him steak and wine. Noticing Theo's hesitation, Hilda assured him there was nothing to worry about. The Ascendant Dragon was completely trustworthy. He had remained by her side through countless lifetimes, without ever betraying her. Unfortunately, Hilda herself had already reached the absolute limit of her regressions. She admitted she never truly understood how the number of remaining cycles was determined. There wasn't any visible indicator or measurable system. She simply developed an instinctive feeling whenever another life disappeared. A vague intuition that told her how close she was to her final regression. Hearing that immediately confirmed something important for Theo. Unlike Hilda, he possessed the mysterious system window, which displayed concrete information instead of relying on vague intuition. Clearly, Hilda knew nothing about its existence. Curious about something else, Theo shifted the conversation toward Theo Ragnar. He told Hilda about his recent meeting with his father and explained how Kyle had shown him his ascendant state. The moment the topic of ascension came up, Hilda's expression darkened. Her mood visibly changed as she stared at Theo before quietly asking whether he'd already seen the Pantheon. She found it almost impossible to believe that someone experiencing only his first regressions cycle had already reached that stage. The revelation clearly disturbed her far more than Theo expected. Seeing her emotions spiral, the Ascendant Dragon gently stepped in and calmed her down before she completely lost control. Surprisingly, his words worked almost immediately. Even though Hilda had looked ready to tear Theo apart only moments earlier, taking a deep breath, she admitted that she was perhaps a little too sensitive whenever the subject of ascension came up. Hilda calmly confirmed what Theo had already begun to suspect. Theo Ragnar was using nothing but his own overwhelming strength to suppress the call of the Pantheon and remain in the moral world. He wasn't going to ascend immediately, but every time he interfered with worldly affairs, the chains of fate wrapped around him even tighter. Eventually, the Pantheon's call would become impossible to resist. According to Hilda, that was exactly why the Patriarch spent so much time sitting on the sidelines while his own children fought and killed one another. She didn't bother sugarcoating her opinion either, openly mocking Kyle for acting like an idiot and practically daring him to come kill his own grandmother before finally leaving the mortal plane. Theo appreciated the confirmation because it perfectly explained something that had always puzzled him. In his previous life, Kyle had secluded himself before the Great War, and now Theo finally understood why. Even so, that wasn't the reason he'd traveled all the way to Spectral Castle. He wasn't interested in information he already knew. The appetizer was over. He wanted the real prize. Since Hilda already knew he was a fellow regressor, she immediately understood what he had. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Come 4. Back during his time in Black Snow, Theo had gathered information about her legendary parchment's prophetic records, capable of revealing the future to anyone willing to pay the required price through wealth or loyalty. To outsiders, they were nothing less than divine scrolls of foresight, but after seeing Hilda's countless regressions, Theo finally understood the truth. The parchments weren't magic, they were knowledge gathered across an unimaginable number of lifetimes. With the Mad Dragon Emperor's resurrection threatening the clan, Theo desperately needed one of those prophetic records. Hilda explained that every parchment she possessed had been written by burning away pieces of her own lives. As an example, she mentioned records concerning Cassandra, the woman destined to become the future magical empress. Naturally, information of that value would never come free. Since Theo was also a regressor, Hilda offered him what she considered an honest deal. In exchange for access to her knowledge of the future, he simply had to become her disciple and tell her everything about his own regression cycle. Theo didn't even wait for her to finish before rejecting the offer outright. The refusal visibly irritated Hilda. After countless years of getting whatever she wanted, she wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. Theo calmly explained that he had absolutely no intention of becoming another piece in her political schemes. Even though Hilda had stepped down as family head decades ago, she clearly hadn't stopped trying to influence Ragnar's future. Rather than reclaiming the throne herself, she intended to control whoever became the next patriarch from behind the scenes. Showing Theo those visions of her countless lives wasn't simply meant to create camaraderie between fellow regressors. It was an attempt to pull him into her camp. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Watching everything she'd done across those endless cycles only convinced Theo that Hilda's obsession with power wasn't all that different from the Mad Dragon Emperor's madness. The warmth instantly disappeared from Hilda's face. Her expression turned ice cold as she realized kindness had been the wrong approach from the very beginning. In the Ragnar clan, the law of the strong always prevailed. The world around Theo suddenly twisted and distorted before he was forcibly dragged into Hilda's deadly glass domain. Offering him one final chance, Hilda declared that he could either become the Grand Matriarch's disciple or suffer the consequences. Inside the domain, countless beautiful spectral women immediately surrounded Theo, their ghostly forms wrapped around him from every direction, pinning him in place while slowly trying to consume both his body and mind. Hilda hadn't bothered easing into the fight. She had unleashed one of her strongest techniques from the very start. Throughout all her countless lifetimes, she'd never failed to obtain something she desired. Whether through persuasion or brute force, everything eventually became hers. A rookie regressor like Theo wouldn't be any different. Outside the domain, Pharaoh quietly observed the situation and noted that only a single minute had passed in reality. Inside the domain, however, Theo had already been trapped for an entire hour. Hilda expected that much mental torture to completely shatter his spirit. Instead, the first thing to crack was her domain itself. Activating both Dragonization and Nirvana, Theo pushed his body and mind to their absolute limits. Every time he destroyed one of Hilda's ghostly apparitions, even more replaced it, making the endless assault feel impossible to overcome. Upon refusing to give up, Theo kept fighting for the entire hour until he finally managed to create a tiny fracture in the glass domain. The opening was incredibly small and would close almost immediately, but it was enough. While still restrained by the domain's overwhelming pressure, Theo summoned a writhing shadow from within himself. It was Umbra, remaining in his covert shadow form. Umbra immediately understood Theo's plan. Without wasting a second, the shadow dragon slipped through the tiny crack just before it sealed shut. Outside the domain, Hilda immediately noticed the small shadow escaping through the fracture. She recognized Umbra at once and already knew Theo possessed a demonic shadow dragon. Pharaoh respectfully asked whether they should pursue it, but Hilda casually dismissed that idea. Abused abandoning its master wasn't worth worrying about. What interested her far more was the fact that Theo had actually managed to crack her glass domain. Even Robert, the legendary black dragon, had taken more than 3 full minutes to break free the first time he experienced it. Theo had shattered that record. Rather than becoming angry, Hilda found the accomplishment fascinating. Since he'd exceeded her expectations, she decided she'd keep him trapped inside a little longer and enjoy breaking him even further. Pharaoh politely praised what he called another brilliant decision from his master, but deep down, he couldn't hide his concern. He feared Hilda's worst habits were resurfacing. Theo Ragnar might be a successor with tremendous talent, but at the end of the day, he was still just a young swordsman. Hilda was taking things far beyond what was necessary. Her current regression alone had already lasted 150 years, and when all her previous lifetimes were added together, no one could even begin to estimate how old she truly was. Pharaoh hated the thought of watching such a promising young talent slowly wither away under her obsession, but despite his worries, his loyalty to the Grand Matriarch remained absolute. Just as Hilda was preparing to continue breaking Theo's spirit, she suddenly sensed another presence entering Spectral Castle. Instead of reacting with hostility, she calmly told Pharaoh to step aside, already expecting a rather dramatic entrance. Sure enough, the next moment, the ceiling exploded apart as someone forced their way straight into the castle from above. The newcomer was none other than Robert Ragnar, the Black Dragon himself. Looking at Hilda's glass domain, Robert couldn't help remembering the miserable days when he had personally been trapped and tortured inside that very technique during his younger years. Without any hesitation, he simply reached out and lightly touched the domain from the outside. The supposedly unbreakable prison instantly shattered into countless pieces. Robert had never been a fan of pointless games, especially when Theo Ragnar's life was on the line. Moments after the domain collapsed, Theo was violently thrown back into reality. He coughed up a disgusting black substance before finally regaining consciousness, seeing Umbra nearby. Theo immediately understood what had happened. The little shadow dragon had successfully escaped the domain, found Robert, and brought back exactly the help Theo needed. None of this came as a complete surprise though. Theo had already realized Robert had been quietly following him ever since his conversation with the patriarch. The black dragon had dropped enough subtle hints over the past few days that it was almost impossible not to notice. Although Kyle had probably assigned Robert to keep an eye on him, Theo had always felt that Robert acted far more like a guardian than a spy. Even when Theo tried pretending he hadn't noticed, Robert wasn't fooled for a second. He knew exactly how sharp the young heir really was. After thanking Robert for saving him, Theo was told that from this point onward, escaping would be his own responsibility. Of course, Hilda Ragnar had absolutely no intention of letting either of them leave peacefully. Smiling from a distance, she unleashed attack after attack while casually complaining that all she'd wanted was to enjoy a pleasant meal with her great-grandson. Since Theo had already come all the way to Spectral Castle, perhaps Robert had decided to join the family dinner as well. Robert ignored every bit of her mockery without giving her the satisfaction of her response. Instead, he quietly coordinated an escape plan with Theo, while Umbra prepared for one final task. As Hilda continued unleashing reality-warping attacks throughout the castle, Robert suddenly gave Theo the signal. The instant he did, Theo sprinted forward with everything he had. Running side by side, Robert matched his speed perfectly, while personally intercepting every devastating attack Hilda launched from behind. The moment Hilda realized they were trying to escape instead of fighting, she abandoned. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Her long range of salts and instantly closed the distance herself. Robert had already anticipated that move. Reading her intentions like an open book, he stepped directly into her path and cleanly blocked her advance before she could reach Theo. Despite having exhausted all of her regression cycles, Hilda's greed remained exactly the same. Like many regressors who had lived through countless timelines, she had gradually begun viewing the entire world as nothing more than something to control and possess. Regardless of the cost, she refused to let Theo leave, but Robert held her off long enough to create the opening they needed. Wasting no time, Theo immediately took advantage of it by diving straight through one of Spectral Castle's massive windows. The leap sent him plummeting from an incredible height, but just before he could hit the ground, Umbra swooped in and caught him perfectly in midair, mounting his partner without missing a beat. Theo finally escaped the grasp of his terrifying great-grandmother. The moment he disappeared into the distance, Hilda lowered her blade and stopped pursuing Robert altogether, calmly leaving the destroyed castle behind for Pharaoh to clean up. She casually announced that she'd be taking a nap instead. Robert found her sudden lack of interest strange and asked why she wasn't chasing after Theo anymore. Hilda simply admitted that watching the boy throw himself out of the highest window in her castle just to get away from her had completely ruined her appetite. As she glanced over her collection of prophetic parchments, however, she suddenly burst into laughter. Amid all the chaos, that shameless little brat had somehow managed to steal one of her priceless prophetic records without her ever noticing. After pulling off his daring heist and escaping Spectral Castle, Theo immediately headed for the pre-emotional East slums in the Edda Empire without even changing his clothes. He flew non-stop, following the directions written inside the prophetic parchment he had stolen from Hilda. Meanwhile, inside a small, rundown house in the slums, a little girl woke her mother after suffering another terrifying nightmare. Her mother gently comforted her, insisting it had only been a dream. But when the little girl quietly explained that the bad people had killed her mommy in that dream, the woman's expression immediately changed. Trying to stay calm, she softly asked whether the bad people had hurt Cassandra as well. Cassandra shook her head. They hadn't touched her. Instead, they tied her up and forced her to watch her mother's murder. Fighting back her own fear, the woman hugged her daughter and reassured her that everything would be okay. As she tucked Cassandra back into bed, she told her one thing she wanted her to always remember. Even if those dreams ever came true, none of it would ever be Cassandra's fault. No matter what happened, They would always stay by each other's side as mother and daughter. Tragically, that very night, the nightmare became reality. Following Hilda's parchment, Theo finally reached the slums. It was hard to believe that Cassandra Edda, the legitimate heir to the empire and the girl who would one day become the legendary magic empress, had spent her childhood hidden away in such a miserable place. The Ragnar clan served under the Edda Empire, the greatest nation on the continent. Long ago, the imperial Edda clan united the entire continent through their hereditary gift, a future foresight. But over countless generations, fewer and fewer descendants inherited that ability. It was almost as if they had been punished for relying on it too heavily. By the present day, the imperial family was only a shadow of its former glory. At this moment in history, Cassandra was the only person within the empire still born with true foresight. If Theo could rescue and protect her now, years before the imperial family even discovered her existence, she would undoubtedly become one of his greatest allies in the future. As he approached the house, marked on Hilda's parchment, however, his nose caught the unmistakable scent of fresh blood. Instantly becoming alert, Theo slipped quietly inside. Strangely, no one guarded the entrance. Instead, voices drifted down from upstairs, climbing silently to the second floor. He peeked into the room and found several hooded criminals casually playing cards, as though nothing unusual had happened. In the corner, tied up inside a sack, was young Cassandra Edda. Lying only a short distance away was her mother, collapsed in a pool of blood with no signs of life. For a brief moment, Theo wondered if the imperial family itself had orchestrated the attack, but there wasn't enough information yet to reach a conclusion. First, he needed answers from the scar-faced man leading the criminals. Hidden behind the doorway, Theo quietly prepared an electrified attack. Only the scarred leader noticed the danger approaching. He immediately shouted for his men to prepare for battle, but they never got the chance. Theo wiped them out almost instantly. The scarred man charged straight at him, only to be slammed back down by a barrage of electrified daggers. Trying to intimidate Theo, he pulled the classic, "Do you know who I am?" routine, which ended up giving Theo exactly the information he wanted. The man instantly recognized Theo as the young Ragnar Lord, who was supposed to be fighting on the front lines. The fact that he knew so much about Theo and Ragnar's current war effort made one thing obvious. He was working for Troyven. The scarred man then revealed his true identity as Opt, the 8th servitor. Although confused about why Theo had suddenly appeared there, Opt saw the situation as the perfect chance to claim the young heir's head. He desperately threw himself into the fight, but Theo effortlessly shut him down. A single dagger was enough to halt Opt's charge completely. After everything, Theo had recently survived from battling monstrous servitors to confronting beatings on an entirely different level. Dealing with someone like Opt almost felt refreshing. Refusing to give up, Opt activated one final trump card. His body turned a blazing crimson, almost like a second-gear transformation, as he desperately tried to drag Theo down with him. In reality, Oct never wanted to die. Everything had gone wrong after he failed to rendezvous with the Azure Peak squad, the very unit originally assigned to retrieve Cassandra. Theo wasn't surprised by Oct's reckless suicide charge. Every servitor seemed to resort to self-destruction. Once defeat became inevitable, calmly reading every movement, Theo danced around the predictable assault before cleanly decapitating the 8th servitor. Oct's head and body hit the floor separately, before both exploded in a burst of demonic energy. After the battle, Theo quietly returned inside the house. Out of respect, he gently covered Cassandra's mother's body. One thing immediately bothered him. Hilda's parchment had never mentioned Troyven targeting Cassandra. The resurrection of the Mad Dragon Emperor had clearly introduced yet another unpredictable variable that completely changed the future. In a way, Theo couldn't help feeling partially responsible for the death of this innocent woman. Hearing footsteps nearby, Cassandra timidly asked whether her mother was all right, begging Theo to answer. As he finally looked at her closely, Theo realized something heartbreaking. Cassandra was blind. It was a cruel irony. The girl, blessed with the power to see the future, couldn't see the present at all. He considered lying to spare her feelings, but before he could speak, Cassandra quietly revealed that she already knew. She had seen her mother's death countless times in her dreams, and every dream she'd ever had always came true exactly as she saw it. But tonight was different. In every previous vision, the bad people always carried her away. This time, however, someone new had appeared. Someone had come to save her. For the first time, Cassandra believed the future could actually be changed. At that very moment, Theo's fifth scenario quest officially began. Find and protect the future Empress. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.